What do you see when you think of Kentucky? Rolling green pastures, famous horse races, or its iconic bourbon industry? However, reports from the CDC on public health, together with crime data published by the FBI, reveal a completely contrasting picture. While some areas are thriving, others are struggling with alarming levels of violence and social welfare crises. From post-coal industry cities to urban areas with record-low safety indicators, the following 15 names represent the darker side of the American dream in Kentucky. This is a journey to understand why, in these very places, the line between fighting to leave and accepting being stuck is so fragile. On West Buechel, a property crime hotspot. At first glance, West Buechel does not appear threatening. A small town tucked near Louisville with short streets and low-rise homes, it has no notorious slums or the barbed wire fences often associated with crime hotspots. Yet it is precisely this sense of normalcy that makes West Buechel unsettling. Because here, when public crime data is examined, a very different picture emerges. According to data from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting (UCR) system and aggregated reports by the Kentucky State Police, the rate of property crime in West Buechel is higher than the state average. Estimates suggest that each year roughly 1 in 11 residents becomes a victim of offenses such as theft, burglary, or property damage. These incidents are not isolated cases but occur frequently enough to become a persistent concern within the community. Theft, break-ins, car prowling, stolen belongings, these are not rare occurrences, but realities residents mentally prepare for. You could live your entire life in a large city and never be robbed. In West Buechel, however, not having been a victim is what feels unusual. The paradox lies in scale. West Buechel is too small to conceal its problems. When a town of only a few thousand people experiences property crime at this level, it suggests that insecurity does not stem from a handful of bad areas, but has spread throughout everyday living spaces. There is no such thing as an absolutely safe zone. A car parked overnight, an unlocked door, a backyard shed, any of these can become a target. Unlike gun violence, property crime does not take lives immediately. Instead, it erodes the psyche. It forces residents into a constant state of vigilance. Surveillance cameras, double locks, motion sensor lights, warning signs, measures typically associated with high-risk neighborhoods have become common fixtures in a small town once considered peaceful. And while West Buechel may only make you worry about your wallet or your car, the next location will raise fears far more serious. Concerns about personal safety itself. 2. Louisville. Violence and economic inequality. In Louisville, particularly in the western part of the city, public safety challenges are clearly reflected in indicators of violence and social insecurity. Louisville has long been a cultural center of Kentucky, home to jazz, bourbon, and distinctive Southern sporting and architectural heritage. However, according to reports from the Louisville Metro Police Department, (LMPD), during 2024 to 2025, the city has faced a troubling reality. Violent crime rates have remained high, with shootings and violence-related deaths approaching historic peaks. What stands out most is the uneven distribution of these figures across the city. The West End has become the focal point of this public safety crisis. Here, shootings occur with high frequency, fostering a form of negative psychological adaptation within the community. Residents are accustomed to police helicopters overhead, security cordons, and spontaneous memorials following violent incidents. In contrast, just a few miles to the East End presents a markedly different picture. Modern infrastructure, high-quality education, and significantly lower crime rates. One city, yet two distinctly different realities. This polarization in Louisville extends beyond income disparities and is clearly visible on the city's safety map. According to data from the Louisville Public Health Equity Coalition, the West End concentrates higher poverty rates, limited employment opportunities, and the long-term effects of systemic barriers. The East End, by contrast, benefits from greater investment and priority access to public services. This imbalance creates a difficult cycle. Economic hardship fuels instability. Instability discourages investment, and the lack of investment further slows development. At the same time, the city faces additional pressure from staffing shortages within law enforcement. Rising attrition among police officers has reduced response capacity and clearance rates, weakening public trust in the justice system. When confidence in institutions responsible for public safety erodes, the practical effectiveness of social rules and regulations is also diminished. Violence in Louisville is thus a consequence of deep urban fragmentation. Yet elsewhere in Kentucky, the challenge takes a different form, one rooted not in overt violence, but in quiet economic stagnation. We now turn toward Appalachia, where economic reports suggest that time itself has begun to overlook towns that were once centers of hope for the energy industry. 3. Pikeville, the post-coal era. Eastern Kentucky is a region marked by the rise and decline of the coal mining industry. Pikeville once grew on the strength of this resource, serving as an important economic center of Appalachia for decades. However, according to reports from the U.S. Energy Information Administration (EIA), shifts in energy policy and market demand led to the widespread closure of coal mines. The silence of machinery and the loss of employment opportunities created a significant social welfare vacuum, giving rise to a range of complex consequences. Pikeville's decline did not occur abruptly, but rather through a process of systematic economic erosion. Beginning with large-scale layoffs, unemployment rates rose sharply, followed by the spread of poverty. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau shows that nearly 30% of the population now lives below the poverty line, an indicator of severe structural disruption for a town that once held a solid economic position. As career prospects narrowed, outmigration among the younger workforce became a near-inevitable social trend. Amid economic stagnation, the abuse of methamphetamine has emerged as a major public health and public safety challenge. In Pikeville, the local healthcare system faces increasing pressure from overdose emergencies, while authorities have recorded a rise in property crime and domestic security issues. Pikeville may not have the highest violent crime rate in the state, but the deterioration in quality of life here has been quiet and persistent. Pikeville has thus become a symbol of the risks inherent in an economic model dependent on a single industry. As coal weakened as the economic backbone, the region struggled to identify a viable alternative path. The rise of social challenges is a direct consequence of an economic transition that has yet to reach a new equilibrium. When the coal industry collapsed, Pikeville lost its economic backbone. In Hindman, however, residents lost not only jobs, but also their very homes. Here, poverty, already severe, has been compounded by the unhealed scars left by the force of nature. 4. Hindman, challenges from natural disasters. Hindman is a small town in the Appalachian Mountains, where fragmented terrain and infrastructure were not designed to adapt to extreme weather events. According to reports from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, the historic flash flood in the summer of 2022 caused severe damage due to sudden and rapidly rising water levels. Key structures such as home, schools, and the public library were heavily damaged within a short period of time. This disaster resulted in large-scale property loss and triggered forced displacement for many households. What makes Hindman particularly vulnerable is not only the disaster itself, but the prolonged and difficult post-disaster recovery process. Long after the event, the town continues to struggle with a slow pace of reconstruction. Regional economic data indicate that repairing aging infrastructure often costs far more than the local budget can sustain. Many roads and drainage systems have yet to be upgraded in a coordinated manner, contributing to persistent anxiety within the community whenever heavy rainfall raises the risk of renewed flooding. Hindman's situation reflects a broader reality about the vulnerability of remote rural communities to climate change. Recovery resources are often prioritized for larger urban areas, meaning that support for small towns like Hindman does not always meet actual needs in a timely manner. As a result, residents are frequently forced to rely on self-help efforts and charitable resources to maintain basic social services. The local population has declined noticeably, as many families have chosen to relocate to safer areas to reduce long-term risk. Those who remain live with a constant sense of uncertainty regarding the sustainability of their living environment. In Hindman, future challenges stem less from issues of social security and more from the intersection of climate change and infrastructure that has yet to be adequately reinforced. While physical structures in Hindman may be rebuilt from mud and debris, the social erosion caused by the substance abuse crisis in Glasgow presents an even more complex set of challenges. 5. Glasgow, the battle with opioids. Glasgow is a town of just over 10,000 residents, where social welfare challenges have become increasingly visible. In recent years, opioids have emerged as the central burden weighing on the community. According to data from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting (UCIR) system, Glasgow's overall crime rate is currently about 30% higher than the national average, with a large share of incidents directly or indirectly linked to drug use. The prevalence of opioids here stems from a combination of factors: the legacy of heavy labor injuries typical of the Appalachian region and misleading marketing campaigns for painkillers in the past. However, statistics alone do not fully capture what is happening behind closed doors. The most severe consequences of opioid abuse are not confined to police records, but are reflected in a deepening generational rupture. The phenomenon of grand families in which grandparents are forced to raise grandchildren because parents are incapacitated by addiction has become a painful new social structure. Families are not breaking apart because of a single catastrophic event, but through an endless cycle of dependency and economic despair. In Glasgow, opioid misuse has shifted from being an individual problem to a comprehensive social crisis. Schools are increasingly dealing with students facing psychological instability, while public services are consistently overstretched. Law enforcement agencies must devote a significant share of their limited resources to handling minor drug-related cases involving fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that, according to the Kentucky Drug Monitoring Report, is present in more than 70% of overdose deaths statewide. This situation exemplifies the strain placed on a small town confronting a nationwide epidemic. Notably, although Glasgow is not the poorest community in Kentucky, opioids are contributing to the intergenerational transmission of poverty. When parents struggle with addiction, children lose critical foundations for development, while healthcare costs and lost labor productivity steadily erode future prospects. As a result, many young people choose to leave early, before the cycle becomes inescapable. While Glasgow grapples with erosion from within, in London crime becomes more openly visible, closely tied to major transportation corridors. The convenience of access along Interstate 75 has inadvertently turned the area into a corridor through which security challenges flow into the local community. 6. London. Security challenges at a transportation gateway. London is not among Kentucky's most remote or poorest towns. On the contrary, it occupies a strategic position along a major transportation corridor, where Interstate 75 passes directly through the area. However, studies on urban safety suggest that this very advantage in connectivity also makes London more vulnerable to fluctuating forms of crime. The highway that channels daily traffic flows and economic activity inadvertently becomes a conduit through which complex social problems enter the community. During the day, London functions as a busy transit hub with a well-developed network of lodging and commercial services, yet local security indicators reveal notable concerns. According to analyses from Neighborhood Scout based on FBI crime data, London's crime rate is significantly higher than the Kentucky state average. Statistics indicate that the probability of an individual becoming a victim of crime, both violent and property-related, reaches approximately 1 in 18, an alarming figure for a mid-sized town. The core vulnerability in London's security structure lies in the transient nature of its population flow. The constant movement of tourists and long-haul drivers along Interstate 75 creates favorable conditions for hard-to-trace illicit activities such as property theft and small-scale drug transactions. When the presence of unfamiliar individuals is a built-in characteristic of daily life, risk identification becomes more challenging for local law enforcement. This reality places London in a difficult position of governance. Police resources must be stretched to monitor not only permanent residents, but also a continuously shifting population. Striking a balance between maintaining an open, business-friendly environment for tourism and tightening security controls remains a major challenge. Excessive enforcement could directly affect the livelihoods of businesses that depend on pass-through traffic. As a result, opportunistic crime hotspots have emerged along commercial corridors. Longtime residents are increasingly compelled to adapt by strengthening personal security measures and altering nighttime routines. While crime in London is closely tied to the constant movement of vehicles and travelers, in Oak Grove instability arises from a different source: the fluctuating composition of its population. At the edge of a major military base, social order faces challenges rooted in a community lacking long-term stability, creating distinct pressures on local welfare systems. 7. Oak Grove. Social chaos. Near a military base situated next to Fort Campbell. Military base, Oak Grove has taken on the shape of a city that feeds off the military. Short-term motels, low-cost entertainment venues, and businesses that appear as quickly as the local population changes with each season. Yet it is precisely this constant fluctuation that has made Oak Grove one of the places with the most visible levels of violence and social instability in Kentucky. In theory, proximity to a military base should be an economic advantage. In practice, Oak Grove tells a different story. The population shifts continuously with cycles of deployment, discharge, and training. Many people arrive only temporarily without building long-term relationships or investing in the community. When a city lacks social roots, community trust is nearly absent, and that creates fertile ground for crime. The deeper causes do not lie with the military itself, but with the ecosystem surrounding it. Oak Grove has expanded rapidly, but without adequate oversight. Bars, nightclubs, low-cost motels, and short-term services have proliferated to serve a transient population. When low-income, high psychological stress and weak social cohesion coexist, violence can become a familiar outlet. Local police are forced to stretch their capacity to manage a constantly shifting community, while resources fail to keep pace with population change. Even more concerning are the long-term effects. Schools struggle as students move in and out frequently. Stable businesses find it difficult to survive. Families seeking long-term security often choose to leave, making room for yet another cycle of temporary residence. As a result, Oak Grove exists in a state of limbo. Not stable enough for sustainable development, yet not small enough to self-regulate through close community ties. When a city depends on a constant flow of people coming and going without building a solid social foundation, violence becomes an eventual consequence rather than an exception. In stark contrast to the relentless turbulence of Oak Grove, the eighth location on the list faces a very different challenge, one in which towering mountains have inadvertently turned the area into a geographic prison, isolated from broader paths of development. 8. Booneville Geographic Isolation. Deep in the heart of Appalachia, Booneville is not a place you pass through by accident. To get here, you must deliberately turn away from the modern world, navigating winding mountain roads, dense forest, and steep, unforgiving passes. And once you arrive in Booneville, the feeling of being trapped quickly becomes apparent. Booneville is located in Owsley County, one of the poorest counties not only in Kentucky but in the entire United States. Nearly 50% of the population lives below the poverty line, a figure that is almost unimaginable in the 21st century. Yet what makes Booneville one of the worst places to live is not poverty alone, but extreme isolation. The mountainous terrain, once celebrated for its raw beauty, has become an invisible wall separating residents from even the most basic opportunities. In Booneville, access to healthcare is not simply a matter of going to the doctor. For many families, it means driving for hours along mountain roads to reach the nearest hospital. As a result, emergency medical care often feels more like a matter of chance than of system reliability. Education faces similar constraints. Schools are few, resources are limited, and the path out of Booneville through education has narrowed to the point where it exists almost only in theory. This isolation creates a harsh cycle. Large businesses are unwilling to invest in a place that is remote, difficult to reach, sparsely populated, and poor. Without investment, jobs do not appear. Without jobs, young people want to leave but lack transportation, money, and support networks. Poverty therefore becomes generational, passed from parents to children like a fate that is nearly impossible to break. 9. Beattyville, a forgotten town. Leaving Booneville, where roads seem to end amid the mountains of Appalachia, Beattyville appears no louder, yet carries its own heavy atmosphere. What defines Beattyville is a sense of being forgotten, as if the outside world has continued moving forward while this town slowed down and gradually came to a standstill. According to the U.S. Census Bureau American Community Survey, Beattyville consistently ranks among the poorest towns in the United States. Median household income here is only around $20,000 to $22,000 US per year, less than half of the national average. More strikingly, the poverty rate exceeds 40%, a figure rarely seen in a stable residential community in the 21st century. For many families, programs such as SNAP, Medicaid, and income assistance are no longer short-term support but long-term means of survival. The root of this condition does not lie in a sudden economic collapse, but in the prolonged weakening of the local economic structure. Lee County, where Beattyville is located, belongs to the group of counties with the lowest levels of industry diversification in the Appalachian region. When traditional sectors declined, the town failed to attract new investment on a scale large enough to replace them. Employment is now concentrated mainly in the public sector, small-scale retail, and basic services, all characterized by low wages and limited opportunities for advancement. Another key factor is population decline and the drain of opportunity. Data from the Kentucky Center for Statistics, KYSTATS, show that the rate of young people leaving Lee County is higher than the state average. Unlike places with two-way migration flows, Beattyville largely experiences departures without returns. Leaving requires money, transportation, and support networks, resources not every family possesses. As a result, part of the population becomes trapped, not by choice, but by a lack of options. Long-term dependence on public assistance creates a socioeconomic paradox. Welfare programs prevent the community from falling into a humanitarian crisis, but without accompanying strategies for job creation and investment, they can inadvertently weaken development incentives. Areas with high levels of welfare dependency over extended periods often struggle to attract businesses due to low purchasing power and a limited labor market. If Beattyville is a testament to entrenched poverty, then Prestonsburg is the inevitable consequence of that reality. 10. Prestonsburg, the consequences of population decline. Prestonsburg is a representative example of how population decline can reshape the entire fate of a small city. There was no single dramatic moment of collapse here. Instead, Prestonsburg has gradually contracted over time as more and more residents, especially young people, have left and not returned. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Prestonsburg's population has declined significantly compared to the late 20th century. Over the course of several decades, the city has lost a substantial share of its residents, reflecting a broader trend seen across post-industrial Appalachian towns. This decline is not cyclical but structural. The number of people leaving consistently exceeds those moving in. As a result, Prestonsburg has entered a prolonged state of population contraction. The immediate causes of this outmigration are relatively clear. As traditional industries weakened, Prestonsburg failed to generate enough new jobs to retain its younger workforce. Counties in this region have recorded a faster decline in the working-age population than the national average. When young people leave, they take with them not only labor but also future family formation, accelerating the city's demographic aging. Population decline brings immediate financial consequences. Fewer residents mean reduced tax revenue, while the cost of maintaining urban infrastructure does not decrease proportionally. Data from the Kentucky Center for Statistics, KYSTATS, shows that cities experiencing population loss often have to operate with increasingly constrained budgets. Decisions such as whether roads can be maintained, schools can remain open, or emergency services can retain sufficient staffing are directly affected by a shrinking population base. As the population decreases, public services are forced to contract as well. Schools consolidate classes or close altogether. Healthcare facilities struggle to retain staff because patient volumes are insufficient to offset operating costs. Many depopulating areas face shortages of basic services, not because demand has disappeared, but because the system no longer has the scale needed to sustain them. Notably, population decline creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As public services deteriorate, quality of life declines, prompting those residents who still have the means to relocate to do so. Small businesses, which depend on population density, struggle to survive as customer numbers fall. Each new wave of departures leaves the city smaller, weaker, and less attractive to potential newcomers. Prestonsburg has not vanished from the map. The city still exists, but at an increasingly reduced scale. Some neighborhoods have grown quieter, many homes are left unoccupied, and the overall pace of life has slowed noticeably. Prestonsburg is not facing an abrupt crisis, but rather a long-term process of contraction, where the primary challenge is no longer growth, but maintaining the minimum functional capacity of an urban community. But do not assume that every troubled place in this list suffers solely from abandonment. Look instead to Paducah. This is a special case, a city located at a point once greatly favored by history, the confluence of major rivers. Yet in the 21st century, this very golden location has become a curse. 11. Paducah, a gateway for cross-border crime. Paducah holds a location that many cities have historically aspired to, a strategic convergence of the Ohio River and the Tennessee River. Throughout history, this geographic advantage turned the city into a thriving hub of river-based commerce. However, in the 21st century, this very gateway characteristic has placed Paducah before a set of complex security and social challenges that require a multidimensional perspective. Paducah's appeal lies in its historic architecture and its designation as a UNESCO City of Crafts and Folk Art. Yet behind this romantic exterior are statistical indicators that invite closer examination. According to data from the FBI's National Incident-Based Reporting System, Inequality, Paducah consistently records crime rates higher than the Kentucky state average. Specifically, the probability of an individual becoming a victim of property or violent crime here is approximately 1 in 26, a figure that calls for careful analysis of underlying causes rather than a superficial reading of the numbers. Why does a cultural center face such figures? According to assessments by social science experts at the University of Kentucky, UK, the city's role as a transportation crossroads, including both waterways and major road corridors, unintentionally makes Paducah a transit point for cross-border illegal activities. Similar to London, the constant flow of transient populations creates an environment that is more difficult to manage than that of purely inland towns. This dynamic contributes to higher incidences of theft and substance-related offenses, particularly along riverfront commercial areas. In addition, Paducah faces a challenge of economic disparity. While the downtown area has benefited from significant investment driven by tourism, reports indicate that poverty rates in surrounding neighborhoods remain at approximately 22%. This imbalance places subtle but persistent pressure on the social welfare system. When economic opportunities are unevenly distributed, issues related to public order tend to intensify. While Paducah works to balance heritage and security, the next location reveals a very different reality. 12. Russellville, the paradox of stability. Russellville stands as a representative case of a distinctive economic condition, the stabilization of poverty. Life here does not unfold amid panic or extreme violence. Instead, it moves at a slow, repetitive pace, a state sufficient to sustain basic existence yet lacking the momentum necessary to generate meaningful breakthroughs. The key element in Russellville's social structure lies in the level of dependence on public assistance programs. Based on data from the U.S. Census Bureau and reports by the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, KCEP, It is estimated that around 25% of residents rely on long-term forms of welfare, ranging from nutritional assistance programs such as SNAP to income support. From an analytical perspective, these social safety nets play a crucial protective role. However, when they become the primary means of livelihood over extended periods without parallel economic development strategies, they can unintentionally create a state of systemic stagnation. This reality directly affects the city's ability to attract investment. When businesses assess the Russellville market, they often encounter a difficult cycle. Low local purchasing power leads to thin profit margins, which in turn limits the creation of high-quality jobs. As employment opportunities lack diversity, the workforce continues to depend on assistance programs. This closed loop is commonly referred to by economists as a low-income trap, in which dependency and stagnation reinforce one another. The consequences of this model extend beyond financial figures and seep into community psychology and the outlook of younger generations. When minimal stability becomes the social norm, attempts to pursue upward mobility are often viewed as risky. The absence of local startup support networks and accessible capital significantly narrows development pathways for young people. Aspirations and future plans are frequently adjusted to fit within the constrained financial realities of daily life. This state of standing still permeates the town's infrastructure and public services. Local small businesses operate at a subsistence level, and infrastructure systems are typically maintained only at a basic standard rather than upgraded comprehensively. Russellville thus becomes a lesson in social welfare governance. When public assistance is not paired with a clear pathway out of poverty, it can unintentionally act as an anchor, holding an entire community in place rather than serving as a launchpad for growth. The stability of Russellville carries a quiet sadness. But at the next location, Shively instability reveals itself more directly through public safety indicators. 13. Shively, the invisible wall dividing the community. Shively is not the epicenter of shocking criminal cases or record-breaking death statistics. However, it is precisely the normalization of small-scale crime that makes this city concerning. Here, quality of life does not collapse after a single major incident but is slowly eroded, day by day until insecurity becomes a routine part of everyday life. Once a stable working-class residential area bordering Louisville, Shively is now facing serious public safety challenges. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting (UCR) system and security analysis platforms such as Neighborhood Scout, the rate of property crime in Shively is significantly higher than the Kentucky state average. Specifically, the probability of a resident becoming a victim of crime here is approximately 1 in 23. Incidents such as vehicle theft, residential burglary, and property damage are no longer isolated events, but have become regular entries in weekly local police reports. The danger of this situation lies in its ability to completely undermine the structure of community trust. When minor thefts occur repeatedly, residents begin to change their social behavior. Dense surveillance camera systems and reinforced door locks gradually replace open conversations between neighbors. Small-scale crime weakens social cohesion even faster than serious violence because it fosters a climate of mutual suspicion. When trust erodes, quality of life declines, followed by falling property values and the departure of families with greater means. The local government of Shively currently finds itself in a gray zone of governance. The security situation is not severe enough to qualify for special emergency assistance from the state, yet it is too complex to be managed effectively with the limited resources of a small municipality. The erosion of trust in Shively is like a slow-acting acid that gradually destroys the social structure from within, forcing residents to build their own barriers in search of personal safety. Yet leaving these uneasy streets behind and moving toward the far eastern edge of the state reveals a completely different reality. If in Shively people are trapped by fear, then in Middlesborough they are confined within a geographical basin. 14. Middlesborough, the city locked, inside a crater. From a geological perspective, Middlesborough holds a position unlike any other in the United States. It is the only city located entirely within the center of an ancient meteorite impact crater. However, this remarkable natural feature creates a profound economic paradox. For Middlesborough, the massive crater, more than 6 kilometers wide, is not a tourism advantage, but rather an invisible lock that restrains connectivity and long-term development. Surrounded by the steep terrain of the Cumberland Mountains, Middlesborough's urban space has little room to expand. The lack of flat, developable land is a direct barrier preventing large-scale manufacturing and industrial businesses from establishing operations here. The cost of land preparation and transportation infrastructure improvements within this geographical basin far exceeds potential returns. As a result, the city is effectively boxed in both on the map and within its long-term development outlook. The consequences of this geographical isolation are reflected in harsh economic figures. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, nearly 30% of Middlesborough's residents live below the poverty line, roughly double the national average. As traditional industries such as coal mining have declined, replacement jobs have largely been limited to small-scale retail and healthcare services. Tourism, despite the label "the city inside a crater," has not become the economic catalyst many hoped for. Visitor traffic generates mostly seasonal employment, insufficient to drive structural economic change for a community of several thousand residents. This reality has fueled an irreversible brain drain. Younger, educated individuals often choose to leave the basin in search of broader opportunities for career growth. As this journey through isolated cliffs comes to an end, the next and final stop is Somerset, a place that may seem adequate for getting by today, yet remains deeply uncertain about what tomorrow may bring. 15. Somerset, the trap of a seasonal economy. This city is not poor enough to collapse nor chaotic enough to shock. Somerset looks fine, and it is precisely this fine that is the problem. When everything is just barely enough, stagnation can last a very long time. Somerset has placed its bet on tourism and outdoor recreation. Lakes, boats, camping, lively weekends. In peak season, the city fills with visitors. Restaurants, hotels, and services operate at full capacity. But once the season passes, the other side of the picture becomes clear: seasonal jobs, low wages, and little added value. Most employment revolves around retail, service work, and basic care. Enough to pay the bills, but not enough to save or advance. Average income in Somerset lags behind the state average, while the cost of living is not proportionally lower. The result is a low-income trap. Workers put in longer hours to compensate for low pay, yet never escape the same cycle. Businesses struggle to raise wages because profit margins are thin. Workers struggle to upgrade skills due to a lack of time and opportunity. The entire system stands still, not collapsing, but not moving forward either. Young people feel this first. After finishing school, they face a clear choice: stay for jobs that offer no long-term future, or leave in search of environments with real career paths. Many choose to go, not because they dislike Somerset, but because Somerset gives them no reason to stay. Those who remain often accept minimum stability, a job that covers basic needs, and a life rhythm that repeats itself. Dependence on tourism also makes Somerset vulnerable to external shocks. Bad weather, economic downturns, or shifts in travel trends can strike livelihoods directly. Without a strong alternative industry to absorb labor, even a small shock can push quality of life downward. The city thus lives in a state of watchfulness, hoping the next season will be better, hoping weekends will bring more visitors. Somerset is not a bad place because it is dangerous. It is bad because it is trapped beneath an invisible ceiling. When an economy is fixed at low wages, education and personal effort are not enough to break through. Over time, getting by becomes the norm, and moving up becomes a luxury. The existence of these hard places in Kentucky is not a random phenomenon, but the inevitable result of historical scars, harsh shifts in the global economy, and formidable geographic constraints. Some areas are weighed down by persistent security challenges, some cities are steadily hollowing out as younger generations leave, and others are quietly left behind by the passage of time. Through these 15 locations, what becomes clear is not only the structural limits of development models, but also the remarkable resilience of the people who choose to stay, continuing to sustain their communities amid relentless challenges.